I want to talk to you today about a topic that is very important to me, and I think it's going to be very important to all of us. It's Agenda 21. And I've entitled this presentation, Agenda 21, Bankrupting American Cities into Utopia. And I'm going to explain the title to you as we go along. But first of all, I want to get a little bit of information from you. How many people in this room have heard of Agenda 21? Anybody? Raise your hands. Okay, good. How many people in this room believe it is a conspiracy theory? Raise your hands. Okay. Okay, we've got a few. When you talk about Agenda 21, when you mention Agenda 21, if you talk to people who have heard about it some, they're going to tell you it's a paranoid conspiracy theory. And if you hear it referenced in the mainstream media at all, that's what they're going to say. It's a paranoid conspiracy theory. Last year, one of the candidates running for Senate who won gave a position paper on Agenda 21. I'm going to tell you who it is at the end of this presentation. And the mainstream media said he is espousing a paranoid conspiracy theory as part of his campaign. So this is how they silence us. But you know, there's an old expression that the best trick the devil ever played on the human race was to convince people he didn't exist. And that's what people who say Agenda 21 is just nonsense are doing. It is a real thing. Now, there are real conspiracy theories tied to it that are nonsense. And I will tell you that from the get-go. If you start looking online and you put Agenda 21 in a search engine, you're going to find a lot of websites, and some of them have crazy stuff on them. Not everything that's written about it is true. But the document itself is real. Agenda 21 is a policy document for the United Nations Conference on the Environment and Development, commonly called the Earth Summit, that was held in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. I've given you the link here to the document itself on the PowerPoint. It's the Sustainable Development Document.un.org. Or, if you can't write all that down today, you can put United Nations Agenda 21 1992 into a search engine, and you can look for the official UN site. When you do that, as I say, you're going to get lots of websites. Ignore those. Go to the official UN website, www.un.org. You're going to see the real documents that are there. They're online for everyone to see. The purpose of this document is to create a global partnership for sustainable development, and that is from the preamble to the Agenda 21 policy document, first paragraph. Now, what does it mean? What's it about? What's it designed to do? Agenda 21 calls for, quote, a profound reorientation of society, of all human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. A major shift in the priorities of both governments and individuals, and an unprecedented redeployment of human and financial resources. This shift will demand concern for the environmental consequences of every human action, be integrated into individual and collective decision-making at every level. Well, what the heck does that mean? That's a lot of long speak. What does it mean? Can we say it in plain, simple English? Well, somebody did. This is from President Obama's speech. He was candidate Obama, May 17th, 2008. He gave this speech in Roseburg, Oregon, which is not far from Portland. Portland, Oregon is a mecca for environmental policies. They love environmentalism, and their smart growth policies that we're going to talk about today were a model for the things that are happening in our city. So this was a very, very strategic location to give this speech. He gave it there because they would get it. And he said what I just read you in English. We can't drive our SUVs and eat as much as we want and keep our homes on 72 degrees at all times, whether we're living in the desert or we're living in the tundra, and just expect that every other country is going to say, oh, okay, you guys just keep using 25% of the world's energy, even though you only account for 3% of the world's population. You can see this speech on YouTube. It took me a while to find it. You need to put in Obama's speech, May 2008, Roseburg, Oregon, and you can see this clip of this speech. It was very significant. You know, we watch a lot of political stuff at my house, and my mother saw this speech. She said, this is the speech. This is what really encapsulates his candidacy. And it turns out that's true, because that was his climate change speech. And then, October 31st, 2008, he gave another speech. And this is just one little clip from it. This was 5 days before the presidential election, 2008. We are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America. Very significant. It was 5 days from the election. Now, I want to tell you right off the bat, this is not an Obama bashing fest. The policies that we're going to talk about today are espoused by leaders of both parties. They are forwarded by leaders of both parties. This is not a Republican or Democrat issue. It's not about left or right. It's about freedom. It's about the Constitution, and it's about our way of life. People of both political parties endorse and work for Agenda 21, and people of both political parties work against it. The picture on the left is the cover of a book written by a woman named Rosa Koire, who is the founder of Democrats Against UN Agenda 21. She speaks all over the country to tell people her experiences fighting Agenda 21 in California, where she lives. This woman is a self-described liberal Democrat. She is liberal on every policy issue that you can be liberal on. You just go down the list. She's pro-choice. She is openly gay. She is married to her partner. She is a 9/11 truther. Every single one, you look for her. But she is also a commercial land appraiser in California. And she began to understand from working in California about land use that something was wrong, really wrong. And she got involved with looking at this issue to find out what was going on. And she founded this group, and she wrote this book. This is a nonfiction book, and I really recommend this. I just read this book 2 weeks ago and getting ready for this talk, but I had seen a lot about it before that. And she talks about real practical things that she did in California, in her city, to fight against sustainable development and land use, and some simple things that she did that weren't even expensive that worked. The other person who's done a lot to bring awareness to this issue is Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck, you may be familiar with him. He was formerly of CNN and then formerly of Fox. Now he has his own network, The Blaze TV. He has the website, theblaze.com, has written extensively about Agenda 21. He's done a lot of exposés. He's done an expose of the chairman of the Earth Summit, Maurice Strong. Has done a lot of work. The book that I put up here, the title, the cover here, is Agenda 21. And this book was actually published last November 2012. This is a fiction book. It is about his futuristic idea of what the world would look like as Agenda 21 is implemented. So it's very interesting. I have not read it. I have read excerpts from it, but it gets good reviews. But it's not just the guys in the tinfoil hats. I'm not saying that Rosa Koire and Glenn Beck are in tinfoil hats, but when you talk about Agenda 21, that's the answer, the pushback you get. And that's guys in tinfoil hats. It's Area 51, it's space aliens in Roswell, it's all this stuff that nobody can prove is not true, it's not real. It is real. Some really mainstream publications have started coming out against Agenda 21, partly because of the work of people like Rosa Koire and Glenn Beck, who were willing to write about it and talk about it when everybody's making fun of them. Last year, Larry Bell, who is an endowed professor who leads the graduate program in space architecture for the University of Houston, did an article about Agenda 21 for Forbes. And that's not guys in tinfoil hats. That's very well-educated people. National Review has done articles about it. So has the Heritage Foundation. I did not become aware of Agenda 21 through any of these things. In fact, one reason I loved Rosa Koire's book, her story about how she found out about this really represents my story too. I have worked in real estate in El Paso for 15 years. I was a mortgage broker for 15 years in the city. And during that time, I saw all of the strange things that were going on, just really strange things, and they kept getting stranger and stranger. And then in 2010, I began to see the Dodd-Frank bill was introduced in the spring of 2010. And I began to read this bill because I was in mortgage finance, and I wanted to see how it was going to impact all of us. And as I began to read it, I got really concerned because this bill was going to strip away Americans' rights to own houses. They weren't going to be able to finance houses. They weren't going to be able to buy houses. And I didn't understand why. We've always been told that home ownership is the American dream. But this bill was going to change that, and I wanted to know why. So I started writing a blog. I started writing a blog called Protection Money. And as I wrote the blog, I started researching Dodd-Frank and trying to find out what was going on. And then in November of 2010, I saw another bill come through. Dodd-Frank did pass. It passed in July. The president signed it into law, July of 2010. And it got very little attention. Obamacare got huge amounts of attention, and there were town hall meetings and people screaming. And Dodd-Frank, not so much. It was sold as we're going to punish those bad people on Wall Street. But in November of 2010, I saw another bill. And the other bill that was also by Chris Dodd. Chris Dodd is the Dodd and Dodd-Frank, and he put through this bill, the Livable Communities Act. It was supposed to be his final bill as a senator because he was going to retire. And it was his signature piece of legislation. And when I read that bill, I began to understand why Dodd-Frank had been passed. You see, Dodd-Frank was not really about destroying the Wall Street banks. It actually helps Wall Street banks. Dodd-Frank was about killing the American dream. Like Obamacare, Dodd-Frank is a huge framework bill. So lots of policy and lots of legislation has to be written as part of that framework. And part of that policy that's been written is just now being written and will be implemented next year. And we have industry studies that say that when that is fully implemented, as much as 60% of the US population will not qualify to buy houses, will not qualify for home mortgages. So we're being transformed from a nation of 60% homeowners, which has been traditional, to 60% renters, permanent renters, people who are not going to be able to buy property. This is a big shift. It's a big shift for our nation. It's a big shift for us. But the Sustainable Living Act was all about we need to be in small communities. We need to be in small housing. We need to be in public transportation. It was about fostering those things. That's when I began to find out about Agenda 21. What was it? What did it mean? Did it exist? And I didn't go to conspiracy theory websites. I went to the UN documents. And then from there, I started looking and I started finding other things and I started finding out more. You know, if you keep looking, you will keep finding. Seek and you will find. Agenda 21 calls for the abolition of private property. Now, if you go to certain websites, for instance, the ICLEI website, we're going to give you that in a minute, ICLEI says that Agenda 21 does not call for the abolition of private property. That's one of the conspiracy theories. But it's not a conspiracy theory. It's true. It is in their documents. This document is the June 1976 preamble to the UN Conference on Human Settlements. If you show this to somebody, they say, well, that's not Agenda 21. And it's not. It's 15 years before. But it's a precursor to Agenda 21. And in the Agenda 21 documents, living spaces are called human settlements. And it says very plainly, private land ownership is the principal instrument of the accumulation and concentration of wealth and therefore contributes to social injustice. So public control of land use is indispensable. You know, the first part of that statement is a true statement. We know that the ability to own property and the ability to own a house is the primary wealth building tool for Americans. Your house is the most expensive purchase that most of us will ever make. It's how we build wealth. It's how we build equity. It used to be called our nest egg for our retirement because you could sell it, you could pay it off, you could live there free. To take that away from Americans, the ability to do that, changes our way of life tremendously. This next slide is from an Agenda 21 document. Private ownership to be replaced with communal ownership. This is Chapter 7, Promoting Sustainable Human Development. The objective of Agenda 21 is to provide for the land requirements of human settlement development through environmentally sound physical planning and land use, and the encouragement of communally and collectively owned and managed land. So I kept researching. I got involved. I wanted to find out more, and ultimately I wanted to help other people find out more. Warren mentioned the 2 books, which he has read. I shared them with him, and they explain Agenda 21. These are fiction, just like Glenn Beck's book is fiction. But today, we're not going to talk about fiction. Today, we're going to talk about facts. Because Jesus said that if we know the truth will make us free. So we're going to talk about facts today. And everything I'm going to tell you today is going to sound outrageous, but you can verify all of it. Go online, do some research. I'm going to give you some websites. It's all true. There are 3 parts of Agenda 21, and they are commonly known as the 3 E's. They are environmental justice, equity, which means social equity, and the economy. The equity part of this is the redistribution of wealth from the West. The premise of Agenda 21, the primary premise, is that the West is too affluent. Our system of life makes us affluent. And that affluence means that we consume too much and we produce too much because we have a system that allows us to consume and produce too much. We are stripping away the world's resources, consuming and producing too much. And because we are affluent and wealthy, and we have a great standard of living, other countries want to become like us. And so they consume and produce too much too, because of us. So the answer to that is to redistribute wealth. Now in America, when we talk about wealth redistribution, we compare ourselves to ourselves. So we think about, well, we're going to take everybody who's below the poverty line and we're going to bring them up above the poverty line. Or some of us may think, well, we're going to take the people like Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, the late Steve Jobs before he passed, and we're going to siphon off some of their money and we're going to give it to some of the lower classes and elevate everybody. Or, you know, there might even be some really unrealistic people out there who think, you know, we're going to take the middle class and make them like Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, and spread it all around and we'll all have plenty. That's not wealth redistribution in a global sense. That's not what it means. How many of you in this room saw Dinesh D'Souza's 2016? Okay. If you haven't seen this movie, a lot of you have not, you need to see it because he explains what wealth redistribution means to an environmental, to a globalist. He never mentions Agenda 21, but he mentions globalism. To a globalist, wealth redistribution means bringing the entire United States down to the level of a third world country like Kenya or Indonesia. And he goes to Kenya and Indonesia in this documentary and shows us what that is. That's wealth redistribution to a globalist, where it's not about comparing us to us or elevating us or lowering us. It's about bringing the whole country down. The premise of this is that we have to abandon free market systems in favor of globalized central planning. And we have to do that basically to get poorer and to stop using up all the resources. Now, let's start with part one, the environmental justice. This is best demonstrated with a picture, because a picture really is worth 1,000 words. This picture is a map of the proposed North American wildways from the Wildlands Network website. The Wildlands Network was set up, it's a non-governmental organization. All of the UN processes right now rely heavily on NGOs, non-governmental organizations. And the former chair of the Earth Summit, Maurice Strong, said that NGOs should actually govern the world, help govern the world, along with the academia and the media, that they should run the world. So this is their map. This is from their current website. Their current website says that currently about 5% of our land use in the US is public land use and the other 95% is private use. I don't know whether that's a current statistic or not, because the government has been acquiring land very, very rapidly over the past few years. But assuming that it is, everything that you see that looks like a big highway, these big gray pieces, are areas where the US is to be rewilded. And if you look, it actually goes through Central America, down to the tip of South America. All this is going to be public land. It's going to be rewilded. Think national forests. According to the website, people will not be allowed to live in these areas. We will be allowed to visit them, to take pictures, to do sustainable hunting and primitive camping. But these areas are going to be for the animals. And some of them are big, scary animals because they believe that dangerous predators should be reintegrated back into their original habitats. And then this is environmental justice. The earth belongs to the animals just as much as it belongs to us. You know, the Bible says that God gave us dominion over the earth. We're just supposed to be stewards. We're supposed to protect it. But rewilding it is it's just ridiculous. Then here's the thing. In the United States, we do not appreciate what this means because we have always had this concept of private land usage, private land ownership. In other countries where the government, any form of government, has owned large parts of land, the people have great suffering. In England, we hear a lot about Robin Hood, and I actually wrote a post about this last year. Where's Robin Hood when we need him? The Robin Hood legend came from Robin Hood hunting deer in the king's forest because the people were hungry and suffering because it was a crime to kill a deer in the king's forest. One of the first major laws that they passed, or charters that the English passed after the Magna Carta, was a charter giving the people rights to the forest, because having no rights to the forest causes so much suffering. So when you say we are going to take about 50% of the US land and rewild it, you're creating a lot of suffering. I also would like to point out to you, this goes right through El Paso, Texas. All of our houses, everything, the East Coast, the West Coast, and where we live. So this creates something else. It creates rationing. You have carved out a lot of property that nobody's allowed to live in. So the rest is rationed. Everything in UN Agenda 21 creates rationing, creates scarcity and rationing. Remember the problem. The problem is American affluence. We consume too much, we produce too much, we're destroying the world, we're inspiring other countries to consume and produce too much. So we have to change, and our affluence has to change. And the first way, the most important way to change that, is to move from a free market system to a central planning system. And that is the goal of what everything that the governments have been doing for years is about. In a free market is driven by supply and demand. If I want something and you have something, probably lots of people have something, I can go down, I can buy that thing, and then the makers of that particular item make money, I have it, everybody prospers. It's driven by market need. Market need determines what happens. For example, when I was a little girl, there was a product called chocolate peanut butter out on the market. I absolutely loved it. I think I was the only one who did. It lasted about 6 months, and then they never made it again. There was no market for chocolate peanut butter. So it went away, because this is a profit-driven system. There is huge market for some things, no market for others. The market produces what the market needs. The people do it to make money. It's profit-driven. It creates winners and losers. All economic systems create winners and losers. But the winners and losers are created by the market. The guys who made that chocolate peanut butter, they didn't do so well. Maybe they went on and found something else that people did want to buy. Chocolate peanut butter, not so much. But it's winners and losers based on what people will respond to, what people want, what they buy. So this system results in a highly productive society with high levels of consumption and production. Because our slogan in the West kind of is, if we run out, we'll make more. And that's what we do. We run out of something, we make more, as long as there's a market for it. Now, when we move to a central planning system is driven by the dictates of central planners. So now it's not driven by what I want to buy. It's driven by what some board someplace says they're going to produce. This is what they're going to have. This is what's going to be out there. Government planners set production and supply rather than market need, and government planners determine the market. So if I'm on a government board and I like chocolate peanut butter, it doesn't matter that none of the rest of you guys like chocolate peanut butter. That's what we're going to have. And we're not going to produce a lot of chocolate peanut butter. We're going to produce maybe, maybe 5,000 bottles of chocolate peanut butter nationwide, and you guys can fight over it. And it's going to be expensive because we produce small quantities. The market's not determining the supply. We're determining the supply, the planners. The planners determine everything. It is not driven by profit. It is driven by government subsidies. The government pays for the things that it wants, and it does not support the enterprises it doesn't want. So it's not profit-driven, it's subsidy-driven. It's top-down. And this system results in scarcity and lack and need. And I want to do an illustration now. Warren has a smartphone. I know because he told me that he did. So hold up your smartphone, please, Warren. Okay, that's a really nice smartphone. I don't have a smartphone, but other people do. And do you like your smartphone, Warren? Yep. Okay. So, if I see that he's got this smartphone and say, that's really great. Where did you buy it? Do you like it? What features does it have that you like? And I might ask some other people in the church. When I told him I was going to do this demonstration, he said, lots of us have smartphones. I might ask some of you, where did you get your smartphone? How much did you pay for it? Do you like it? Does it have the right features? What kind of plan does it have? Okay. The fact that you all have smartphones, or many of you have smartphones, and I do not, does not in any way diminish my ability to get a smartphone. There are lots of smartphone stores. There are lots of companies that make versions of the smartphone. So there's lots of competition. The prices come down. There's lots of opportunities to buy one. That's because we're in a free market system. So in fact, the fact that Warren and many of you have smartphones actually probably increases my chance of getting a smartphone, because the market demands lots of smartphones. So there has to be competition. So it's a cheap product, so I can go out and find one I can afford, and I can bring in my smartphone and compare it to Warren's, and we can see who's the best one. That's free markets, okay? In a central planning system, hold up your smartphone again, Warren. In a central planning system, there are only a few smartphones because the government chooses probably one company to sell the smartphones. Probably one company makes them, probably one store sells them. There are only a few because the central planners decide how many smartphones there should be. And because there are only a few, they're very expensive. They're probably too expensive for a person like me to be able to afford. So if Warren has a smartphone and I don't, I can probably never hope to buy a smartphone. So probably what I need to do is kill Warren and take his. And that's how this really works. This is the reason that in Soviet Russia, in the Stalin years, young couples who wanted to get their first apartment turned in their neighbors and had them killed as traitors to the government so they would have a vacant apartment to move into. Because the planners didn't produce all that many apartments. There was housing rationing. There was land rationing. There was rationing of everything. There was scarcity and shortage. See, in a free market system, if you have something and I don't have it, your having it does not impact me at all, except it might make me want one. It might inspire me to go buy one. And the fact that there are plenty in circulation makes that possible. But in a central planning system, if you have something, Warren has that smartphone in a central planning system, it means that I don't. And the only way I can get it is to take it away from him. It creates a finite supply, scarcity, need, misery. And this is very important when you're talking about some of the issues that we're going to be talking about in a few minutes, because this really has profound consequences. I did a flow chart for you to further illustrate this. The goal is to reduce U.S. wealth and influence in the world. That is the goal. We have to reduce U.S. wealth and influence in the world, because if we don't reduce U.S. wealth and influence in the world, we can't stop the overproduction, overconsumption. So, create scarcity, and you use an economic crisis to create public support for increasing control over the economy. Then, you use the scarcity to gain increasing control over personal freedom as scarcity, misery, and dependency grow. And you use central planning techniques to create scarcity, pick winners and losers, dole out economic perks to the people and projects on your side, and punish dissenters. The planners choose who gets everything. There's more scarcity. And then finally, the final step, as misery and scarcity become the new normal and dependency on government grows, you can persuade the population to relinquish freedom for a new global system of security. Because at every phase, as things get increasingly worse, you can say, hey, you know, it's not working, we need more control. It's not working, we need more control. We need more control, we need a new system, we need to redo it. That's how this works. Remember, global central planners have the solution to all of our problems. They just need to create the right problem so that we let them implement the solution. And that's what Agenda 21 does. It creates problems to bring forth the solution. In 2012, Agenda 21 celebrated its 20th anniversary, and they had a birthday party for it in Rio de Janeiro, which was the first place that Agenda 21 started. This is now a 21st century message with 21st century messaging. You won't see a whole lot about Agenda 21, but you will see a lot about the new policy document for Rio Plus 20, which is called The Future We Want. It has a Twitter hashtag, The Future We Want. If you're on Twitter, go into Twitter sometime, put in this hashtag and see what comes up. You're going to see lots and lots of tweets and links from people who are pro this. They're environmentalists, globalists from all over the world who think this is the answer to our problems, who are very excited. And they also have a streaming, real-time web TV of the climate change work the UN is doing right now. And they have YouTube videos for the current Secretary General of the UN and for various countries. In 2012, China produced a video with their citizens. They interviewed about 232 Chinese citizens, and they produced this video. It's on YouTube. You should see it. It's about 4 minutes long. It's called The Future We Want 2032. And the Chinese government asked various citizens to tell the world what they wanted to see in 20 years, with their goal for 20 years. It's very interesting, because they've got this mix of very young Chinese people. One of the young women says that her goal is to be able to speak Chinese with people from all over the world. Well, China owns our debt. So if we don't start getting our house in order and paying them back, they're going to be speaking Chinese to us. This is a real serious thing. But you should see the video. I really recommend it. Now, I told you at first, this is not about one party or the other. Every president of both parties since 1992 has supported the goals of Agenda 21 and furthered the goals of Agenda 21, without exception. President George H.W. Bush signed on to Agenda 21 and the Earth Summit in 1992. The Senate did not ratify this treaty, so it's a soft treaty. It was never ratified by the Senate, but it is being implemented. Many people say that George H.W. Bush's New World Order speech was about Agenda 21. However, that speech was actually given in 1991 in reference to the invasion of Kuwait. So there's no actual evidence that is connected to this. But he did talk about the New World Order a lot. In the meantime, everybody is committed to it. Everybody is on board with it. Everybody has worked towards it, both parties consistently. President Clinton created the Council on Sustainability in 1993 so that they could work on a local level to implement Agenda 21. And in 1995, ICLEI was created. ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, is a non-governmental organization that works worldwide with local governments to implement Agenda 21. And Agenda 21 is implemented on a local level right now. There are some national policy decisions that drive it, but it's implemented locally. There are over 1,100 cities worldwide that are members of ICLEI. Over 550 US cities are members. That number actually used to be higher. The exposure that Agenda 21 has gotten from people like Beck and like Rosa Koire have actually caused cities to leave their membership. So if you do a little research, you'll see the cities that used to be members and the cities that are now. It's very instructive. El Paso, Texas is a current member. And you can see all the US members by going to ICLEIUSA.org for the US. You can see the worldwide members at ICLEI.org. You can read their policy statements too. Because of the fear of globalism, that was even a long time ago, in 1998, Gary Lawrence, who was an advisor to the Clinton-Gore Council on Sustainable Development, said we need to rename Local Agenda 21. In some cases, Local Agenda 21 is seen as an attack on the nation state. So we'll call it something else. Comprehensive planning, smart growth, growth management. Those are the names by which we know it today. Today, Agenda 21 goes under the terms smart growth, smart code, sustainability, smart meters, sustainable development, green, walkable, livable. That's how we know it. That's how we know it here in this city. Over the last 2 years, our city has implemented smart growth, smart code, and they're in the process of doing it. We've seen huge changes to our city in the last 2 years. In the last 2 years, we've had a new landscape ordinance to make our city greener. You know, where Ryan Little was up here talking earlier about the overruns on our project. Part of the overruns on our building project here in this church are because of the new landscape ordinance and smart growth. The church is being charged extra on the parking lot because we have to put in little islands of greenery. And we're not allowed to put up as many parking spaces. And we have to have green lights, which don't cause light pollution. This is very expensive. And it creates a less useful parking lot. It creates rationing because Agenda 21 policies always create rationing and scarcity. It makes things more scarce. That's the goal. So we have a less useful parking lot and it's more expensive. Green is very expensive. Anytime you get into green, it costs a lot of money. It's not easy being green. It's not cheap either. We have a new downtown redevelopment project. If you've turned on the news of any channel in the last 2 years, you have seen about the downtown redevelopment project. We have a huge new project going up, and you may have even seen some of the slides that they have put up from the city planner. And it shows us how we're going to be changed totally. We're going to have storefronts down below and retail up above, or I'm sorry, housing up above. So it's going to be retail below, housing above. And people are going to live above the store, just like they used to. And we're going to be in apartments. Remember what I told you about the Dodd-Frank bill? We're moving from a society of 60% homeowners to 60% renters. The streets are going to be narrow because Agenda 21 discourages driving. So it's narrow. We're going to have transportation corridors, public transportation. We have bike lanes. We have walkable communities. We have green spaces. We are expanding our public transit system after spending $27 million on Sun Metro, including $13 million from federal funds and $14 million from state and local funds. They just announced this on the news a couple of weeks ago. So we're going to have this bus system that's really ramped up because we're not supposed to drive. Driving uses energy. We're supposed to use public transportation. We have a AAA ballpark baseball stadium and new city headquarters for new offices downtown. The AAA ballpark baseball stadium is actually, the foundation was being poured this week. We moved our city hall. We imploded our city hall April 14th, and now we have the baseball stadium going up. And we have other green things. We have roundabouts to calm traffic, even though the residents, I saw a news report from KVIA that 70% of El Pasoans say they hate roundabouts. Roundabouts calm traffic. That's Agenda 21 code for stop driving. You're not supposed to be driving. You're supposed to be using public transit. We don't want you in a car. Cars pollute. How did we accomplish all of this? Well, first of all, our city hired a consulting group. They were called Dover Coal. Dover Coal is from Portland, Oregon. And I told you Portland is a home of smart growth. This consulting group came in to do city meetings about smart growth, smart code. If you go to the city website, they will tell you that there was huge buy-in from the community, and they'll show this photograph of all the different people at the meetings. I went to some of those meetings. I was the chair of the board of the El Paso Hispanic Chamber of Commerce in 2011, so I attended some of these. The neighborhood planning meeting that I went to, I was the only person there. Nobody else showed up. It was me and the man and woman from Dover Coal explaining the plan. Why did nobody show up? Well, because it's the city master plan. We're going to redo the city plan. You know, that sounds really dull. Maybe if they had said, you know, we're here as part of a UN plan to bankrupt your city and take away all your stuff and put you in tiny housing, people would have shown up for that. But it wasn't advertised that way. It was advertised as the city master plan is here and this is going to be great. Voters did not get to vote on the master plan. That's pretty normal, I think. I don't think voters in most cities vote on the city plan. But this buy-in, there were other meetings where people did attend, and I went to some of those too. But the individual neighborhood meetings, a lot of people didn't show up for those. They didn't understand what was going on. The city council made a decision on a AAA ballpark and the expenditures. The voters did not get to vote on that. The cost for our city hall and our ballpark together is estimated to be between $85 and $100 million. In addition to the bonds that we voted on, the city was able to float additional bonds that we do not vote on. So we have hundreds of millions of dollars in debt that we did not get to vote on. We did not get to vote on moving City Hall. We did get to vote last November on the quality of life improvement bonds, which were over $440 million. These bonds are supposed to help us. We also got to vote on the hotel tax. And if you saw the ads last year that the city did, it was very clear. This is not voting for the ballpark. This is not voting for City Hall. These are done deals. They don't impact, you don't have any impact on these. The only part you get to vote on is how people pay for it. Do you want to pay for it with high property taxes? Or do you want outsiders to pay for it when they come to visit the city? So, of course, everybody went out and voted for the hotel tax because we didn't get to vote on anything else. I got my property tax bill a few weeks ago. It went up 15%. The city didn't raise the tax rate, but they reevaluated the properties, and that's the same thing. And so the taxes are high. The taxes were supposed to be low. Taxes are high. The taxes are very high, so that we can pay for this. So for the low, low price of $500 million, we are told that we are getting a better city where younger people will want to live. We want the creative class. We want young, hip, cool people who will drive economic growth in our city. We're going to get a cleaner, greener, more walkable city. We're going to get economic growth from downtown revitalization. And we're going to get renewed civic pride. We won an award from the EPA. Our mayor won an award, one of the top 5 mayors in the world. People will love us. They'll appreciate us. It's our time. Except for one small thing. We're spending money we don't have, and that's a proven strategy for failure. A KVIA story that aired September 12, 2012, reporter Matthew Smith interviewed Deputy City County Manager Bill Souter, and he said of AAA ballparks, they all lose money from a strictly accounting thing. It's going to take us 250 years to break even on the stadium expense. That is longer than the United States has been a nation. Our great-grandchildren won't see this paid off. But it's okay, because it's going to drive economic growth downtown. It doesn't matter. They all lose money from a strictly accounting thing, but it's okay, because we're going to be green, and that's going to drive development, and that's going to cause people to move in. It's going to cause companies to move in. Well, maybe not. They all lose money from a strictly non-accounting thing, too. Colgate University in the summer of 2012 did a study directed by Peter Kohler, and this was their finding. Literature suggests that only 8 of 55 stadiums that are currently in use and were constructed with at least 25% public funding have succeeded in spurring economic development. Only 8. And last year, the Maloofs, you may be familiar with the Maloofs, they own a big casino in Palm Springs, or in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I think also in Palm Springs. They're very, very wealthy family. They were supposed to build a stadium in Sacramento, California. and they pulled out, and the Sacramento people were enraged. But the reason they pulled out was they had listened to a report from economist Christopher Thornburg, who said that when you do these stadiums, you will put Sacramento on the edge of fiscal disaster. Economists have long understood that new arenas and sports stadiums don't bring new economic activity. They just move entertainment dollars around. In other words, maybe I'll go to the movies, maybe I'll go spend $40 at the ballpark. What do? Well, they create zones where private property can be taken for eminent domain for developers. And our current congressman is an advocate of this. He has spoken publicly about the need to use eminent domain to take private property, to give to developers, to make the city more viable. He hasn't said it for a long time, but he said it before he was candidate for congressman. It creates a new class of property zoned legal non-compliant. If our transportation corridors work the way they have in other cities, on North Mesa Street, as our first one, it's a long street, there's going to be a class of property zoned legal non-compliant, which means that you cannot rebuild your property the way it is now if it burns down. You have to rebuild it up to new smart codes. It's more expensive, closer to the street, parking in the back, using green standards. It's very expensive to rebuild these properties. This is a very expensive venture. And it restricts the type of properties that can be built and limits owners' control over their property. So how's this working out for everybody else? We wanted to be like everybody else. That's why we did this, so we could be like other people. Well, Stockton, California has a sustainable development, a green city. They have an arena stadium downtown. They have a new city hall. And in 2012, they became the largest city in the United States ever to file bankruptcy. They spent $35 million building a new city hall. The payment on it was $197,000 a month. When they missed the payments, Washington Mutual repossessed City Hall. So it's actually in foreclosure. And they said last year that that was strategic because they needed to pay their debt. Well, they needed a different strategy. $35 million and it's been repossessed. Detroit, Michigan announced this past Monday they are insolvent. Detroit has a downtown stadium. They have Comerica, downtown ballpark. They have hundreds of millions of dollars in bonds. That's what Stockton did to finance theirs too. Hundreds of millions of dollars in quality of life bonds. They have the creative class moving downtown, the young, hip people. In fact, the New York Times did an article on Detroit that the salvation of Detroit was going to be the young, hip urbanites. Except that there's not any development going on right outside of downtown. And they can't pay their bills. They have a $167 million cash shortfall in Detroit. There's one important difference between us and Stockton. Stockton has an average median income of $55,000 a year, based on the Census Bureau numbers. El Paso has an average median income of a little over $39,000 a year. And the expected ticket prices for the AAA ballpark are $40 with the concessions and the other ancillary items. They couldn't pay for theirs. How are we going to pay for ours? But see, remember, this ties back to the big goal. The goal is to reduce American affluence. This is happening all over the United States. We're being bankrupted into utopia. We have $17 trillion in debt as a nation. We have hundreds of millions of dollars in debt as a city. Now, don't misunderstand. I am not saying that the individual members of the city council conspired to bankrupt our city. I don't believe that. But the Bible says that people who have not committed their lives to Jesus Christ are blinded by the God of this world, that they cannot see. And because they cannot see, when organizations like ICLEI come in and say, this is what you're going to do, this is how you're going to make your city modern, this is how you're going to make your city smart, this is how you're going to bring in the young people, they can't see that it's a trap. They can't see what's wrong. And so when people like Joyce Wilson say that we're ignorant and that we're idiots for opposing the ballpark, we're not ignorant. We know how to read, do simple math, and use a search engine. She can't see. But the people who put these plans together from the UN down, they can see. They see. This is planned way up at the top. They just sell it to everybody else. To achieve the environmental utopia, we have to give up freedom. We have to give up individualism. We have to be bankrupt. We have to have scarcity, need, and want. There are 5 stages to implementing Agenda 21 on a global level. And if you want to know what stage we're in, you need to look at the messaging. The messaging comes out of the government, the media, the entertainment industry, and the schools. And it's constant, and they're working on it all the time. Stage 1 we're in right now, and I've been talking about it, sustainable development. Move toward the inner cities. Move away from cars and houses. These apartments are going to get really tiny. Michael Bloomberg in New York, the progressive mayor of New York, just got the city rezoned to allow 200 square foot apartments, micro apartments, because he says it's 47% of Manhattanites are single anyway. You don't need more room than that. These are going to be really small as this gets progressive. You're not going to have room. You have green spaces. You have parks where you cannot develop land, open spaces, because you don't have yards anymore. But that produces land rationing. So that produces tiny apartments, and very few of them. And then you get back to my model I was showing you about the smartphone. There aren't enough apartments. So if I need an apartment and you have one, guess what? I can tell somebody you're a traitor to the system and get yours. The messaging is here. It's everywhere. Hip, cool people live in the inner cities. They don't live in houses. Only nerdy, stupid people live in the houses in the suburbs. Nobody else lives in the suburbs. It's horrible. Shows like Burbs, Purgatory. Nerdy people live in the suburbs. Hip people live in the cities. The radical faith movement is actually pushing this out too. They are telling if you live in the inner cities, or in the suburbs rather, if you live in the suburbs, you are a greedy, selfish person who does not want to share Christ with your neighbors. If you were a real Christian, you would live in the inner city. They're making millions of dollars on books that say this right now. Phase 2, also being worked on. Gun control and disarmament. And these are two sides of the same coin. This is the same thing. A few weeks ago, the UN finally passed their small arms treaty. They've been working on this for a long time. The president is going to sign off on the small arms treaty. But the Senate would have to ratify it for it to be a hard treaty. It is imperative that this treaty never be ratified. And the only way it won't be is for us to put pressure on our senators daily to sign petitions, to call them, say, don't ratify this treaty. Closely tied to this is the U.S. gun control bill. The U.S., after the Sandy Hook tragedy, when all those children died, President Obama said we've got to have gun control. This is not a new thing. This is an old thing. They can just keep pushing it forward. And U.S. nuclear disarmament. There was a story I read this week that the president is going to sign an executive order to reduce our warheads down to 1,000. A congressman is threatening to stop that. Meet the new chairman of the UN Disarmament Conference in Geneva. They elected him he's for the new chairman. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And he is in charge of disarming the world. Now, if you know a little bit about Ahmadinejad, you know why he would want to disarm the world. He's building his own nuclear weapon. The messaging on this is that our society is violent. Gun control will make it safer. We can protect against future tragedies. We can protect against rogue nations, even while having a rogue nation as the head of the disarmament treaty. Yeah. Stage 3, this is going to be huge. I wish so much I had more time to go into this. I don't. But there's a lot that's going to be on this. Sustainable food systems, control of the food production and agriculture. We need to get rid of pesticides, eliminate high output systems of food production, and end the transportation of foods. This ties in closely to the UN Zero Hunger campaign, which is going on right now. You can see the videos from the Secretary General of the UN. The message on this is we produce plenty of food in the West, more food than we need, but our systems of farming are unsustainable. So we need to get rid of pesticides, eliminate high output food systems, go to small farms, and stop transporting foods. The average vegetable travels 1,500 miles. So we need to bring food, to just eat food grown locally. The messaging on this is American children are at the same time obese and hungry. 1 out of 5 is food insecure, and this is a huge just misstatement, because food insecure just means that your family worries about food. It does not mean you're hungry. The percentage of children in households with children who are actually hungry and experiencing hunger in the United States, according to the USDA numbers, is 1%. It's not 20%, it's 1%. But this messaging is important because the message is we need to control food. We need rationing. 1 out of 3 is obese. We need healthy lifestyles. And this is from Michael Bloomberg in New York. The government needs to restrict our diet for our own good. The Secretary General of the UN statement this week that he made in his video, that you can see, is that we have too much consumption, we eat too much, and we waste too much. So they're going to fix it so we can't eat too much and waste too much. And that is coming really soon. The messaging has been everywhere on this for 4 or 5 years. So if we do not get a handle on this, this is coming in probably the next 5 years. Stage 4 is population control on a global scale. The goal of Agenda 21 is to reduce carbon emissions by 85%. According to the head of the EPA, China's EPA, they reduced their greenhouse gas emissions by reducing their population to 1.3 billion. And that's the only way you can do that. And the proponents have a plan. You can see Ted Turner's interview with Charlie Rose in 2008. You need to go online and see this. It's like 2 minutes long. Turner says if we don't reduce the population in 30, 40 years, we will be 8 degrees hotter, none of the crops will grow, the people will be cannibals. We have to get rid of the people. Now, he says we can get rid of the people by everybody promising to have 1 or 2 children. That's it. You have 1 or 2 kids. The problem is if you really did that, that would be 0 population growth. It would not reduce the population. We need to get down to 1 or 2 billion, and that's just not workable with that. You have to do something else. Well, if you listen to this interview, especially if you listen to this interview, you're going to say, nobody listens to Ted Turner. And you'd be right. I mean, this is ridiculous. Nobody listens to Ted Turner right now because we have a free market society. We have plenty of food. We have plenty of land. We have plenty of housing. We have plenty of everything. But if you put in a system of rationing where you don't have enough food, you don't have enough housing, you don't have enough of anything, you have scarcity, you have want, you have need, then the messaging is suddenly, we don't have enough food. We don't have enough land. We don't have enough housing. We have too many people. We've got to get rid of all these people, or most of them. They got to go. And that's how you do this. It's very dangerous. That leads to the 5th stage. Stage 5 is Ahmadinejad is talking about the New World Order now. You know, he's very, very active in the UN. He works on the arms treaties. He works on the climate change. He spoke last year at Rio de Janeiro and said, we need a new system of global governance. Something brand new. All of our systems have failed. Nothing's working. So we need something new. And the only way we're going to get something new is to create a totally new system. And you know, Ahmadinejad prays every year at the UN General Assembly for Allah to send the Mahdi. The Mahdi is the Islamic Messiah who has prophesied that he will come at the end of time. And he will bring Islam across the world, and he will wage war against all the Christians and all the Jews and bring all the world into submission to Islam. We know him by another name, the Antichrist. Do I believe Ahmadinejad is the Antichrist? No. I think he believes it. I think the reason he prays that every year at the General Assembly is he's hoping that the heavens will open and a great light will shine down and say, this is the one, follow him, which has not happened yet, and probably won't. But see, Ahmadinejad does get it. He's not just a crazy little man from Iran. He actually gets this. He understands that when you create suffering and need and misery and rationing, you create the perfect storm for one man to come in and say, I'm going to fix this. We're going to do something new. And I'm the guy to do it. Follow me. And you can do it. And he knows that. That's why he's on all these boards. He knows that he can do this, that he can make this happen, and that he can open the door for it to happen, although I do believe he thinks it's him. What does the Bible say about all this? Thessalonians 2:1-7. That day, the return of Jesus Christ will not come until there is a great rebellion against God. And then the man of lawlessness is revealed who brings destruction. That's the Antichrist. The man of lawlessness who brings destruction is the Antichrist. And you know what is holding him back, for he can be revealed only when his time comes. For this lawlessness is already at work secretly, and it will remain secret until the one who is holding him back steps out of the way. If people tell you there's nothing to theories of global conspiracies and secrecies, the Bible says the work of the Antichrist is being done in secret. But he can only be revealed when the one who is holding him back stands out of the way. Who is that? That's the Holy Spirit. That's the Spirit of God that holds back the Antichrist, that has held him back for thousands of years. We understand that because we're in the church. Somebody else understands it too. The Huffington Post, May 13, 2013, the climate change study that released May 1st, Religious belief in the second coming of Christ could slow action on global warming. 56% of Americans believe Jesus is coming back, and that makes them less likely to accept global warming. See, the Spirit of God in us keeps this back because our eyes are open. We can see. We're not blinded by the God of this world. So when they tell us, oh, this is a great idea, we can say, no, this doesn't line up with the Word of God. It's not a great idea. And we reject it. How do we hold it back? How can we hold it back? Because I believe that we can. We've been holding it back for thousands of years. The spirit of Antichrist has been in the world since the Tower of Babel, at least, and actively in the world since the first church, because it was written about. Well, first of all, we can pray. We need to pray as a nation. We need to pray for godly leaders with right attitudes who will have discernment and understanding to know what to do for our nation, for the $17 trillion in debt that we owe to our enemy, China. We need to pray for our city, for wisdom to pay off the debt that we've incurred. We need to pray for wisdom for state leaders. We need to pray for stewardship. And if somebody tells you, oh, God doesn't care about that stuff, of course he does. God gave us the gift of a great nation, and he cares about the fact that we are running it into the ground. He cares what's happening to us, and he wants us to care, his church, his people, his body on earth. And when we care, things in this country will start to change. When we pray and we ask for help. Did you know that the Bible has a policy statement on national debt? It does. It's in Deuteronomy 28, 1 and 12. If you will fully obey all the commandments of the Lord your God, the laws I'm declaring to you today, God will transform you into the greatest nation in the world. He will open his wonderful treasury of rain in the heavens to give you fine crops every season. He will bless everything you do, and you shall lend to many nations and not borrow from them. But if you won't listen to the Lord your God and obey these laws I'm giving you today, then all these curses will come upon you. Foreigners living among you will become richer and richer while you become poorer and poorer. They shall lend to you, but not you to them. We need to get into prayer about the situation we're in. We also need to pray for revival. 56% of Americans believe in the second coming of Jesus Christ. But I can tell you without looking it up, it's people over 35. The globalist environmentalist, sustainable movement is being marketed to young people, people under 30. We need to pray for revival in that generation. If we do not get revival in that generation and get it quickly, the great rebellion that Thessalonians talks about will come. And when that comes, the Antichrist will come, because the Bible says that. So we need to pray that young people's eyes are open, that they give their hearts to Jesus, that they get saved, they begin to understand what they need to do. Find out about the United Nations, about what's going on, about sustainability, globalism, and the code words it hides under. Because these things prosper in the secret, they don't prosper in the light. There's lots of information online. Vote and be an informed voter. June 15th, we're going to have a runoff election in this city. There are 2 candidates for mayor. One of them is on board with everything we've talked about today. Get informed. Read candidates' websites. Find out what they say. Find out what they believe in. A lot of them have policy positions on Agenda 21. I told you there was a candidate for Senate last year who put up a policy position paper on Agenda 21. It was Ted Cruz. You can find out online what people believe about this, what they say. 10 years ago, if you had asked somebody, what do you think about Agenda 21? You might as well have said, what do you think about the existence of Sasquatch? They'd have looked at you like you're nuts. Today, a lot of people know about this. You can find out what they know. Find out what their principles are. Find out what their policies are. Make sure they're in line with the Word of God. 2014 is a critical election year. A lot of seats in the House and the Senate are up for election. If we need to be active, we need to be finding out about candidates. We need to be running good candidates. The outcome of that election is going to determine whether or not we have a federal climate change bill. If we get a federal climate change bill, it is going to advance everything I have talked about today by leaps. It will no longer be just local cities. It's going to be huge. We need to vote, we need to pray, and we need to stay informed. And finally, we need to get involved in our city, on a city level. Grassroots activism works. Because of exposure to the light, Agenda 21 is now illegal in Alabama. It is illegal in the state of Alabama to advance any of the goals of Agenda 21 or have any of its cities be members of ICLEI. Oklahoma is working on a bill like that, and so is Missouri. We need to get involved. They don't like pushback. Push back. The Bible says that we are the salt and light. We have to shine light. We have to bring light. There's a lot we can do. You know, we could say it's the end times. We don't know that. The end times have been since Jesus came. Jesus went up to heaven. My grandmother's 92 years old. When she was a young person, Hitler was in power. Everybody thought Hitler was the Antichrist. Hitler was an Antichrist type. He wasn't the Antichrist. Maybe he would have been if people hadn't stood up and pushed back. We have an obligation to occupy until he comes. We are the original occupiers. We occupy until he comes. We fight for the truth of the gospel until he comes. I want to call Warren up to lead the closing prayer.